Hello everyone, I'm Grace Grogan. Paul Cannon and I live and travel full-time in a motorhome. Today we are visiting St. Andrews by the Sea in New Brunswick. Located on the Passamaquoddy Bay, this is one of Canada's oldest towns, founded in 1783. We are going to share an historic courthouse and goal, the extreme Bay of Fundy tides, and drive across the ocean floor to visit Minister's Island. The goal, or jail, was built in 1832 and was used until 1979. It is a provincial heritage site and now houses the Charlotte County Archives, which includes more than 20,000 historical photos and several thousand documents. We had to walk through the gate on the right to enter. There are a total of 8 cells, and we were told that there was one wood-burning stove at the end of the hall as the only heat for the area. Just the hall indicates what a dreary existence incarceration was. This is one of the cells. The covering on the wall has been torn off and there is no glass in the window. Leo Hamilton, who was an inmate in 1975 to 1976 and did solitary confinement in one of these rooms, said that the snow would blow in the window and onto the floor. Here is one of the cell doors and a hangman's noose. This noose has 13 coils, but the most common number was 8. The goal is to break the man's neck when he drops. Too few loops and the noose tightens too quickly and the head is severed. Too many loops and it tightens too slowly, resulting in strangulation. In addition to the strong door bolt to keep the prisoner inside, there was space for a padlock to secure it further. This cell has some type of plaster over the brickwork. When Leo Hamilton did solitary confinement in 1975, he was given one Army-grade blanket, slept on the floor, had a bucket for going to the bathroom, and meals were passed through a tiny opening on the door. Can you imagine how miserable confinement in the 1800s and early 1900s must have been? The Charlotte County Courthouse was built in 1839 to 1840 by Thomas Berry and is a provincial and national historic site. It is thought to be the oldest courthouse in continuous use in the country and is still used today for mock trials. Built on an elevated site to establish its status in the community, the Greek Revival architecture features a monumental pedimented portico with a royal coat of arms that was carved by Charles Kennedy in 1858. The coat of arms represents the British origins of the United Empire Loyalists from Maine who settled the area in 1783 after coming north to escape the American Revolutionary War. The courthouse is vernacular construction, meaning simple and practical, which is typical of mid-19th century maritime courthouses. Here in the courtroom, the table is where the prosecuting attorney, defense attorney, witnesses, and the sheriff would sit during court. Look at the open drawer on the table. That is where Sheriff T. Jones scratched his name and the date October 1844 at the place where he always sat during court. I found old law books on a shelf in a side room, which included the Journal Assembly New Brunswick 1870, Acts General Assembly New Brunswick 1874, and New Brunswick Acts 1907. The Canadian Supreme Court reports began with Volume 1 in 1876 to 1877 and went beyond Volume 20, which covers 1890 to 1891. Now presiding, the Honorable Grace Grogan. Court is now in session on the matter of the People versus Paul Cannon. Paul Cannon, standing in the defendant's box, is charged with taking too many photographs while driving up and down the streets of this fine city. The judge, being sympathetic to his passion for photography, dismissed the charges. This is the St. Stephen Lighthouse. St. Stephen was incorporated in 1871 and is where the Ferry Point International Bridge to Maine is located. St. Andrews Market Wharf is used by both fishing boats and whale watching tours during tourism season. The difference between a wharf and dock is that a wharf is where ships may dock to load and unload cargo or passengers. This is an excellent place to experience Bay of Fundy tides. Here's the Pendlebury Lighthouse under low tide with ground exposed on the right. The lighthouse was built in 1833 and operated until 1933. Under high tide, the land is no longer exposed on the right and the floating breakwater has risen and is filled with seabirds. We have a boat coming in and you get another look at the floating breakwater as the boat approaches the no-wake zone. Looking at shore from the left side of the wharf during low tide, notice the shoreline. Here's another look at that same area during high tide. Notice how high the water comes up to the shore now. This is a look at the right side of the wharf with a fishing boat and houses at high tide. Again, watch the shoreline. There is another look at the same shoreline during low tide. You can see how far the water has receded. Look at the water line on the wharf, which is a clear indication of how much variance there is in water level. These are fishing boats at the wharf during high tide. Notice the boat height in comparison to the wharf in the background. This area has a 24-foot tidal range, which means anchoring requires plenty of scope, and when the area is busy, mooring is recommended. Looking at the same area during low tide, look how far the boats have gone down, and you can see the water line on the wharf in the background. At low tide, moorings are at 14-foot depth, and at the front of the wharf, the depth varies from 9 to 13 feet. Here we have an old ship sailing into dock. The day before going to Minister's Island, we drove down to look at the tide charts. The Jeep is sitting where we will be driving onto Bar Road, which is now covered under 16 feet of water during high tide. Minister's Island can be seen in the distance to the right. A sign warns not to cross if water is on the bar and to check the tide schedule. Bar Road is beginning to show, and now Bar Road is clear for us to start our drive across. You can see Minister's Island, which is Canada's largest tidal island, in the distance. We are now beginning our half-mile drive across the ocean floor. During high tide, the bar road we are on is under 14 to 16 feet of water. This same road was originally navigated by Passamaquoddy First Nations people, who were the first inhabitants of this tidal island. In the 1700s, this same road was navigated by horse and buggy by Parson Andrews, the minister that settled on the island and gave it its name. A glimpse of our GPS shows that our vehicle is driving in water. We have not yet reached low tide. We are crossing at 9:15 a.m. Low tide is at 11 a.m. According to the tide schedule, we have to come cross back no later than 2:30 or be stuck on the island for 6 to 7 hours until the tide goes back out. Tide schedules change daily, so you have to check the chart before crossing. Warnings state that if there is water on the road, not to attempt crossing, even in a vehicle, because the tide rises quickly and the tide waters are swift and the water is frigid. The island is named for Parson Andrews, who began a ministry and settled the island in 1790. The island remained in the Andrews family until 1891, when a large parcel was sold to Sir William Van Horne. Van Horne's daughter, Addie, purchased the last piece of island in 1926. The 500-acre island is only a part-time island due to the exposure of the Bar Road during low tide. It is a provincial and federal historic site which has 20 kilometers, or about 12.5 miles, of trails worn by carriages that can now be used for hiking and biking. Only a small portion of the island is accessible by car, which is where you will find Covenhoe, the 50-room summer residence of Sir William Van Horne, an American who was the driving force behind the Canadian Pacific Railway. While on the island, we will be visiting Van Horne's 3-story barn, his residence, and making stops at the minister's cottage and gardener's residence. The Van Hornes loved to entertain, and there were numerous accidents on this bar road with horse and carriages due to the swiftly moving tides. This map shows the southeast half of the island that we will be visiting. The minister's house was built in 1790 by Reverend Andrews after he purchased the island for £250 sterling. Thereafter, it became known as Minister's Island. Visiting parishioners and getting to services was difficult due to the tides. The three-story barn was designed by Edward Maxwell and constructed by unemployed shipwrights in 1898 at a cost of $20,000. This photo shows the two large silos and has a retaining wall that leads to the barn. Here are the horse stalls. The barn held prize-winning horses, cows, and pigs. This is one of the largest barns in the country, and the farm was one of the finest and best-run small farms in the country. Coming up out of where the cattle were being fed, you have the silo wall on the right. The light at the end is the entrance to the second silo. We are standing in the silo looking toward the top. The silos are each 16 feet in diameter and could hold 110 tons of fodder, which is dried hay or feed for cattle and other livestock. This is a doorway for the silo. Look at the thickness of the wall just through the doorway. These are antique fire extinguishers. We will see the gray can again later. The two glass fire extinguishers are Sure Spray automatic chemical sprinklers manufactured by the International Fire Equipment Corporation in Staten Island, New York. The glass extinguisher was filled with carbon tetrachloride and had a metal trigger at the end. The chains were used for hanging from ceilings in factories and homes and acted like a sprinkler system. There were assorted tools hanging on a wall, including two-man saws. One was for ripping, one for cross-cutting. There is an axe, shearing scissors, a large sickle for cutting things like grass and hay, and a smaller sickle. There are 4 hand drills with auger bits and a sledgehammer. We don't know if these pens were for pigs or sheep. This is taken from the upper level of the barn. The trap door allows hay or grain to be dropped below. To build the 3-story barn complete with a grain elevator and the interior framing took 50 train loads of rough lumber. This was in the top level of the barn, but we do not know what it was used for. The beady water bowl system, if assembled complete, would have a water bowl that would come up and around the flat part and be mounted to it. We are in the cattle milking area. The barn was designed to allow cattle on the lower level to be fed through openings on the upper level. Similar openings allowed for manure from cows and horses to be added to a compost area in the basement. Here are more tools leaning against a wall, which include part of a scale, a chisel, and a shovel. Some additional tools include an axe, trolley parts, and a block and tackle. We do not know what the large round item is and speculate that it may have served as a lightning rod on top of the barn. This area had sheep pens and wide windows on the right. The barn was designed with an extensive use of well-positioned windows to provide maximum light and ventilation. When Van Horne visited the barn and saw workers staring out the window, he had many of the windows moved to a height beyond their sight level as a way of increasing productivity. Here's a view of the creamery from the window by the sheep's pen. Milk produced by Dutch belted cattle were piped directly from this barn to the creamery. We are looking at part of the gate locking system on the sheep pen. A bolt lock in the barn, obviously very large. More tools on a wall, including an oil can, jars holding nails, a wood marker or scriber, a keyhole saw, a file, claw hammers, a ball peen hammer, which is used by metalworking, a mallet, syringe, and an adjustable wrench. This is a carpenter's toolbox. This sits on top of the carpenter's toolbox and is holding 3 hand saws. This is a Smith Indian No. 90 fire extinguisher manufactured by D.B. Smith & Company out of Utica, New York. The original patent dates from 1930 to 1932. For fire, you put the tank on your back and operate the pump to direct the spray at the fire with the nozzle. This is a cattle milking area with a feeding trough and water bucket. Here are some additional views of the cattle milking area and feeding trough. The Dutch belted cattle were known for their resistance to disease and excellent milk production. The creamery was designed to keep the interior cool for preparing milk, butter, and cream. Excess raw milk was sold to local dairies. When the Van Horne family was not on the island, dairy products from the creamery were shipped by train 410 miles to Montreal for their enjoyment at home. We were surprised to see horses still being kept on the island. They are hard to see, but there are a total of 5 horses in this photo. This is the gardener's home as seen from the back. The doorway from the house allowed the gardener to walk directly into the greenhouse without going outside. The gardener's cottage was built in 1893 and provided year-round housing for the gardener and his family. About halfway through the greenhouse is a boiler room. Construction of the greenhouse began in 1908 and were the largest of their kind in Canada, growing grapes, cucumbers, peaches, nectarines, pears, plums, and cherries. Produce was packaged and shipped to Montreal for the Van Hornes to enjoy during the winter. This shows you the length of this greenhouse. In summer, there were acres of orchards, gardens, and paths to maintain. Mowing twice a week was by horse-drawn mower and required 30 miles of walking for one complete cut. The view you would have down Cedar Lane as you would leave the Van Horne home after a visit. Cedar Lane goes from the Van Horne summer cottage to Bar Road. Can you imagine traveling this by horse and carriage as you hurried to cross before the tide came in? Here you see the windmill, gas house, and carriage house. Prior to getting electricity on the island in the 1960s, carbide gas was made in the gas house and pumped to the main house for electricity. The windmill provided water until the well dried up, and then another well had to be dug in the woods. Let's peek at the well inside the windmill. The garage was built by Benny Van Horne in 1917 to house 2 automobiles he had purchased. There is a chauffeur's apartment upstairs. Built in 1892, the carriage house is a combination carriage house and barn. The stable could hold 7 horses and there was a hayloft above. The upstairs was a 2-bedroom apartment for the stable keeper. We are looking at the front of Covenhoven, about 1/2 way between the house and the water. Construction of this 50-room summer cottage of Sir William Van Horne began in 1891 and is named for his father, Cornelius Covenhoven Van Horne. I'm standing on the far end of the porch. You can see the water to the left as it curves around the island. This is how you entered the home. This arch is where carriages would have stopped to pick up the family, or when visitors came, it is where they would have disembarked to enter the home. We enter into the parlor. Notice the beautiful carved wood on both sides of the fireplace. All artifacts on display are original to Covenhoven. The dining room is set for dinner. There are 2 high chairs. The corner of the table has a large bell for calling a servant. Look at the decorative trim on the china cabinet to the left, and the butler's pantry can be seen at the far end of the room. Here are china, cruets, and candlestick holders on display. This wooden ironing board and iron, wash tub with wringer, and washboard are in the laundry area, which was a very small room located at the back of the home where the butler's and cook's bedrooms were located. It is also where the servants' stairs came down from above. There are 2 small doors in this bedroom that go into the knee wall at the back. All bedrooms were very large. The upstairs included 8 bedrooms, a playroom, and 7 servants' quarters, plus a back set of stairs for the servants to use. I believe this to be what the floor plan has as Addie's parlor. It has a beautiful view out the back looking at the water, and also has a side window and a closet door on the short section of a knee wall. However, some of those features do not match the floor plan of the house, so I'm not positive. I don't don't know whose room this was, but I really liked the fireplace, finding it to be very unusual and was the only one of this type in the home. This was Lady Lucy Van Horne's room. She had the master bedroom, and William Van Horne slept on the main floor. Behind the headboards are doorways that go into the knee wall. The bedroom had a walk-in closet with custom glass enclosed cupboards at the top to hold her hats. This is a nice collection of antique items on a dresser top, including an oil-burning lamp, a collection of bottles, and a hand mirror. Check out the carving on the back of the dresser and also the pattern in the picture frame above. An intriguing bedroom with a lot of knickknacks, but also the intricate artwork on the bed and dresser in bird and nature designs on the headboard and footboard, with similar designs on the dresser. The decorative carving on the top of the headboard is also on the top of the dresser. This video was taken when we stopped near the center of Bar Road on our way back to the mainland. The puddles of water that have been present this morning are gone, and there are many locals on the bar digging for clams. It is still 1.5 hours before everyone has to be off the island and bar for high tide. Here we are looking back toward Minister's Island. There is a wall of seaweed and rocks and cars driving on Bar Road. There are several cars parked along Bar Road that belong to locals out digging for clams. This is looking toward the mainland, and you can see Bar Road as it rises out of the Passamaquoddy Bay. We are now back on the mainland and are looking down Bar Road toward Minister's Island. The seaweed at my feet is where the water started when we parked here the day before. In 2 to 3 hours, the bar will disappear below 16 feet of water. Thanks for watching. Paul and I hope you enjoyed our tour of St. Andrews by the Sea and the drive across the ocean floor to Minister's Island. Feel free to hit that share button below. Give us a big thumbs up and leave us your comments. Check back often, and if you want to receive notice each time we publish a new video, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, we will be rolling through North America and hope you will travel with us.